What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Calgary Barbell. This is Form Check Friday. This is the series where we take viewer-submitted videos, we put them up on the screen behind me, and we try to help everybody be better, more efficient lifters with a little bit of technique advice. So if you're interested in that, come on in and we'll get right down to it. If you're interested in submitting, go ahead and submit to FORMCHECKFRIDAY@gmail.com. Any other emails that go anywhere else, we unfortunately won't get. So go ahead and send them to FORMCHECKFRIDAY@gmail.com. We use a random number generator to pick through the 700 odd some emails now, and we pull up 5 for each episode, and we're gonna dive right into that. So our first video comes from David. Now, David, pull up my pen here. David Alfaro. Now, I believe we've actually had David on the channel before. We've maybe looked at some of his lifts in the past. And David is a 74 kilo powerlifter. He's competed in 2 USAPL meets and plans on competing again later this year. So these are some sumo deadlifts of his at 440 for 5 reps. So about 88%. And he wants to know if there's any egregious errors that can be spotted. He'd greatly appreciate the feedback. So let us take a look here. All right, David, let's see what we're working with, my man. So it looks good and smooth off the floor. We're holding our start position relatively well, keeping the back somewhat braced in. Definitely starting with a good sort of push off the floor. We're not rushing it, not seeing the hips shoot up too badly. That lockout was maybe a little bit questionable. Starting to lose a little bit of back position near the end here. Having a bit of a tough time with that lockout. Better control on that rep, actually. Looks like this is going to be a difficult set. A little bit of hype, and away we go. All right. So a few things. Now, when we start, obviously, plenty of gas in the tank. No real big issues here. We're staying over the bar. One thing that I think actually we could do is stay a little bit more over the bar. Sorry, it's way too big here. It looks like we're trying to pull back almost immediately as you start the lift. So we're starting to try to extend the hips and get this side of things moving more upright as you initiate the pull. And ideally, what I'd like to see you do is keep that shoulder over the bar, be a little more patient in terms of the sort of shoulder angle and upper back angle, and try to focus on knee extension. Try to focus on pushing that bar off the floor, being a little bit more patient. We can see here as he initiates the pull, we're trying to pull back even more. So we'll see the back angle here. This is the start position roughly. As we go through the next frame or so, we're seeing that back angle change. We're seeing him pull back onto his heels, pull back through hip extension, pulling the bar harder into his shins, causing some loss of position in the low back, causing that little bit of rounding there, which near the end here is creating a really tough time locking out. So we can see here, pretty good start position, but what we do is we shift everything back onto the heels too much, causing us to pull that bar into the shins, causing us to round out this low back, and then we end up with a tough time stuck at lockout here, where we're still a little bit flexed here. The glutes are mostly, the hips are mostly extended. The upper back is certainly extended, but we just have this piece to lock out, which gets pretty tough when we're under load. And then when we get through lockout, we end up almost overcompensating by breaking at the knees, ending up with a little bit of soft knees. And this 4th lockout, it's actually that's the 5th one, sorry. Here we go. So this 4th lockout's actually probably the worst of them, where we're a little bit soft to the knees, and the lockout only lasts a quick second before you set it down. So I would argue that that rep probably wasn't even all the way locked out. So the big things to focus on here are not to pull back too early. Try to stay over the bar, be a little bit more patient off the floor. Don't worry about correcting into a super upright position as you initiate the pull. Try to stay over the bar just a little bit more. Push the floor away as you initiate the deadlift, and try to stay more mid-foot as opposed to solely on the heels. As well, when you finish through the lockout, make sure that we're keeping those quads flexed, keeping those knees locked, and getting those white lights. All right, moving on here, we have one from Dan Su, and he says he's a huge fan of the channel, always looking to improve his form, and would love to be picked. Well, Dan, it is your lucky day, my man. We're gonna take a look at, let's see, I think it's more deadlifts. It's more deadlifts. Let's take a look here, Dan. All right. So fairly long torso, quite lean, looking jacked, man. And let's see what we got here for reps. Well, clip fall off the end of the bar. Well, the bar's almost at capacity. So we can see here that we have a pretty long torso actually, and relatively short femurs, at least looking from this angle. And what happens is we get really pulled out of position in the shoulders here. So as we initiate the pull, not only are we not actively depressing the shoulder blades very much, again, something I preach about all the time is depressing those shoulder blades, trying to shorten the lever of the torso. Right now, we have this very long lever. If we can get those shoulder blades down even a little bit, we're trimming a good inch or so off that lever that we're trying to work against and produce force through using hip extension. Now, as we initiate the pull, obviously the hips rise, we compromise our back position, we start to see a little bit of flexion through the back, and we're seeing those shoulders get pulled forward. So what I would recommend if you're looking to tweak your technique, now obviously this technique actually looks quite efficient and quite strong. He's very strong through lockout. We're not having a whole lot of issue getting hung up towards lockout a lot of times, like we saw in that last video that was sent in by David. A lot of times people will get hung up at lockout around this position, have a really hard time locking out. Now, Dan seems to not have much issue with that, even at these relatively higher intensities. So I don't think it's going to be as big of an issue for Dan here. But if you were looking to modify your technique to try to become more efficient, I think this is the first thing I would look at. Shoulder blades down, maintain a little bit more back extension, be a little bit more patient with that sort of push off the floor. And again, we see a lot of deadlifts here. A lot of times I'm harping on about the same old things, but they're very common mistakes that people often make. So I think that tightening up that upper back position and trying to maintain a little bit more extension through the trunk as you go through those deadlifts could go a long ways for you. Next one here comes from Mingdong, and this is his bench press training video, 52 kilos for 5 reps. He's going to compete in powerlifting in May this year. Right now, he says it's just a college level competition. He says 2 things have been very confusing to him. One, when I try to bench press heavier, around 60 kilos, he cannot set his butt on the bench. I'm guessing he means keep it on the bench. Another is about the arch. I've heard that the arch is all about the thoracic rather than the lumbar. I cannot tell the difference of these 2 types of arch, even not sure if his arch is correct. All right, so let's take a look having those things in mind, and let's look at Mingdong's bench. So this looks pretty solid. I think we're getting a little bit shrugged up. Again, we're seeing those shoulder blades creep up towards your head as you get to the touch, and we're also seeing the bar out in front of the elbows. Now ideally for this bar position, I'd want to see the elbows closer to there, so maintaining a little bit more tuck of the elbows. In terms of the arch, I don't really think there's much issue. I know a lot of people will talk and argue and back and forth about whether or not the arch should be thoracic or lumbar. I think it's more of just a global extension, right? We want to be extended at the hips. We want to be as extended in the back as we can to try to bring that chest up to the bar and shorten the range of motion. I honestly don't think that people can differentiate that much between a more lumbar arch and a more thoracic arch. We're limited by the sort of the sort of base flexibility of our vertebra And that might be different from person to person. Some people might be a little bit more flexible through the lumbar. Some people might be a little bit more flexible through the thoracic. But there's only so much extension we can have. And it's generally a pretty global thing, right? We're extended all the way through the hips, all the way through the low back, and all the way through the upper back. So I don't think there needs to be that much of a differentiation between the two, or in how you focus on creating that arch. In terms of keeping your butt down, one thing that I might try is moving your feet out or moving your feet back a little bit. A lot of times when we see that butt pop up, we see those things moving around. We can play with foot position. We can play with creating a little bit more tension, making sure that, for one, the glutes are flexed. If the glutes are flexed throughout the whole lift, we'll have a harder time popping the butt up. Bar path looks okay, but again, as every touch, the elbows are back behind the bar, and what we want is those elbows in, so they're a little more under the bar, so that the bar is here, the elbow's here, as opposed to staying so flared out. Now, in a lot of cases, I'll tell people to flare their elbows more, but in this case, I think the bar is actually getting out in front too much, especially on these later reps and these later touches. You can see that bar even rolls a tiny bit as it approaches Mingdong's chest here. There you go. We can kind of see that right there. That bar floats out away from you a little bit. So I would keep the elbows tucked in a little more, tucked more down towards your butt to keep them in under the bar rather. And I think that's going to allow you to focus on a really good sort of back and up bar path, which bar path actually isn't bad. But I can tell you're having a tough time bringing that bar back because that bar is so far out in front of where your elbow is. All right, and I hope that helps you, Mingdong. Our next submission comes from Renz Maverick Edge Alsance. I've been lifting for 2 years now, but just started switching to powerlifting January 2018. So this is his first year on the big three, he says. Now let's take a look and see what we got here. All right, Renz, we're doing some squats. So I'll start that over for anybody who missed that first rep there, including myself. As I was switching screens, Dylan has 19 monitors in here, so. All right, I'm seeing a couple things I think we can work on, but let's watch through this first video here. So back position, bracing actually looks pretty good. I think the biggest thing that we're seeing that bears some correcting is gonna be that bottom position here. So that rep wasn't bad. Let's see if we can find a more pronounced rep. That one, we actually saw a little bit. So as we come down to the bottom, we're very focused on staying arched up. I think we could go a little more ribs down in the front, try to create a little bit more of a sort of closed scissor, if you want to reference some Duffin stuff. Chris Duffin, by the way, if you guys want to look him up, he's got some pretty good stuff on bracing in terms of ribs down and the closed scissor concept. That works pretty well for a lot of people. So as you approach the hole, I think that we could probably be a little bit more ribs down as well. When we get into the hole, we're shifting the weight onto our toes pretty substantially. We're seeing the knees pop forward, and then out of the hole, we're gonna see those knees shoot back pretty, oops. We're gonna see those knees shoot back pretty noticeably. So right here, I might just move my marks there. They're not doing anybody any good. Right here, we're seeing those knees shift back pretty hard. So generally speaking, we're a little bit loose in the bottom. We might be going a little bit too deep. That weight is transferring forward to the toes pretty substantially in the hole. So I would work on that as well. I think the biggest things here are going to be probably just practicing some pause squats, practicing some tempo squats, becoming more comfortable with that bottom position. That's going to be a big thing. You'll be able to feel a lot of these things going right or wrong as you learn to powerlift, as you learn to execute the big three a little bit better. But I think the big one is going to be this bottom position here. Now, not a lot wrong with that, but I think we could be a little tighter. I think we could keep our feet a little flatter, and I think we could keep our knees forward out of the hole a little bit more. That rep was actually pretty good. Overall, you're checking a lot of the boxes. You're doing a lot of things right. Your depth is definitely on point. Your depth is definitely good and sufficient for powerlifting. So all in all, I think the biggest things to focus on are going to be a tighter bottom position and trying not to shift forward in your feet in the bottom. Try to stay nice and rooted, nice and flat-footed. Excuse me. Whew. All right, our next one comes from Andrea. And on Andrea, this is my squat RM, 5RM, 215 pounds at 128 pounds body weight. My previous 1RM from June 2018 is 231. I have my next powerlifting meet in October. I squat high bar and have a more upright style. My stance is also relatively narrow, so anything too wide thrashes my hips. Also, I know you guys prefer landscape videos, but my phone is a bit wonky in landscape. Sorry, that's okay. My one main concern on my squat is my anterior pelvic tilt. It's not as noticeable when I'm using my belt, but still something that I'd like to work on. Out of the whole, I feel like my hips rise first. My squat can be almost disjointed to individual movements. Focusing on breathing into my belt has helped, but I'm not sure if I'm on the right track. Any help would be appreciated. All right, Andrea, let's take a look at these squats. All right, great. So first off, depth 100% there. So honestly, one of the things I would have said was maybe try a wider stance, but she said that that's no good for your hips. I think the biggest thing is going to be potentially trimming some depth off of that. So right about here, we're right on the line with depth, but then we go quite a bit deeper. And from that position can be a little bit harder to recover from. However, you're doing more of a high bar squat and a high bar style of squat, so that little bit of depth might be necessary for you to get sufficient sort of rebound or sufficient stretch reflex out of the bottom, and in order to kind of orient yourself properly in the bottom position. So I definitely see that little bit of sort of, if we watch, a little smaller there, if we watch the knees here, and I'll see if I can draw a bit of a better line. There we go. See how much they pop back. They really don't pop back that much, at least not instantly. It sounds like this was also a pretty big PR for you. So I honestly wouldn't worry too much about most 90% of this squat. I think the big thing would be potentially learning to cut your depth a little bit. In terms of your positioning out of the bottom, yes, we might see some hip rise. That's kind of inherent to a more high bar style of squat. We're going to get a little bit more pronounced sticking point. We're usually going to get a little bit more hip rise. Excuse me. So in some of these cases, that's not necessarily something that's worth, making big or large scale technical changes over. I think, again, the big thing here is going to be continued practice. You're obviously getting stronger. You said your previous max was 231 for a single, and this was 215 for 5. So obviously making huge progress here. And in terms of, seeing some issues out of the hole, again, I would recommend some pause, some pins, some tempo squats, and just keep practicing. I honestly don't think there's much wrong with this. We'll take another look, maybe scope in on kind of the upper back and what the upper back's doing. Again, hard to tell because the plates are covering the elbows. Feet look really damn well, like they look really damn good. We're very rooted into position. We're not seeing much tipping backwards or forwards in terms of what the feet are doing. So yeah, Andrea, I'm not really sure that there's a whole lot you need to work on technically. I think the biggest thing, like I said, is just going to be practicing further. So suffice to say that you are definitely on the right track with what you're doing with your squat. So keep doing it, keep practicing, and yeah, a lot of times that's honestly the answer. I can sit here and give you suggestions on technique and try to point you all in the right direction, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to technique being a very individual thing. A lot of the criticisms, a lot of the suggestions I have on here, take them with a grain of salt. The best and most effective changes to your technique are going to come from your own learning, your own process, and my attempt here is simply to guide that process and to give you some ammunition, things to try with a lot of your learning. So hopefully everyone got a little bit out of this episode, and Again, if you are interested in submitting for Form Check Friday, go ahead and submit to formcheckfriday@gmail.com, and be sure to tune in for our twice weekly Twitch live streams where we do exactly this. And if you tune in, you could submit your video and we will, I'd say 100% right now anyways, we're getting to every submission that comes in. During that, we have a different inbox where we take only live submissions and we critique form live on the stream. So head over to twitch.tv/Calgary Barbell and come check us out there. Hope everybody has a good day and a good weekend. Happy training, and we'll see you all in the next one.